If you can see my screen, won't you put something in the chat? There you go. Thanks, Amar. Well, good morning. My name is Mitch Milam. I am going to be your host today, and today we're going to go through what I call eliminating technical debt. And this is based on, well, basically, I've done this a lot through my career with Dynamics, but I just had a 3-month stint at a company that that's all we were doing is basically cleaning it up. There we go. So again, my name is Mitch Milam. You can reach me via email, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or YouTube. This is being recorded and it will be placed up on my YouTube channel as soon as I get done, maybe this weekend before I get it all processed and things like that, but it will be up there. And I put all my webinars up there along with some other stuff. So be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you see it. Okay, I also have some JavaScript training. If you've ever been interested in that, just go out to, it's actually now HTTPS, sorry about that, learn.xrmcoaches.com for some JavaScript training. So let me tell you my story I just mentioned a minute ago. So I went to work for a company here in Dallas that was a real estate firm. And we get in there and one of the meetings we were kind of going through stuff and it's like, what do you think about just starting over? I'm like, well, no, but you probably just don't want to start all over from scratch because of things. And that was on Thursday. By Friday afternoon, I was thinking, you know what? Starting over would not be a bad deal at all. So here's kind of some stuff that we kind of cleaned up in 3 months. So this is 3 months with 3 of us working pretty much full time on it. So we cleaned up a bunch of workflows, went from 298 to 241, a ton of solutions. Now everything was unmanaged, so there were just transport solutions left over from the actual initial development, et cetera. So things were pretty much everywhere. Couple examples from two of the entities that we work with. You know, this is a sales organization, so we had leads and opportunities. So we cut our custom fields down from 195 to 121, and views, we cut those in half. Opportunity was pretty much the same thing. So we had 330 fields to start with, 304 when we got done. Views were even crazier. We had, at one point, we had like over 100 custom system views, not just personal views. And what caused this was everybody was a system administrator. And so people just did whatever they wanted to. And the reason this happened is because the partner who installed it pretty much migrated them from a proprietary system over into Dynamics 365 online and walked out the door. And then the customer was left to more or less fend for themselves. And people being people, they just did whatever they wanted to get the job done at the time. And when we got done with all of this, it's like, okay, now we're trying to get things cleaned up. And we have to clean things up, and now we need to know what to clean up. So this is how all this started. So who can guess how long this system was in place? Just put it in the chat window. Anybody? Ron says 5 years, 20 years, 10 years. 4, okay, 3, okay. No, 10 months. This system was 10 months old, and we actually considered scrapping it and starting over. That's how much work there was inside of that. So yeah, so one of the most unique circumstances that I've ever been in, to be quite honest. I've never seen a system that was that new and had that much work done to it in that amount of time. And really what it was is their business was changing at a very rapid rate, and they were adapting Dynamics to those changes and not having the time or personnel to go back and actually clean things up. So we started on this path that unfortunately got interrupted almost at the very end. So we didn't actually get to finish, but it was a pretty good experience for me to kind of get back into things and see how we actually do stuff. Okay, so let's talk about the process that we follow. Now, I will admit, This is what I have come up with. Everyone else on this call is going to have a totally different set of way of doing things. Some of this may apply to you, some of it may not apply to you. So as we go through this, keep in mind, this is just my experience over the past, say, 14, 15 years, however long I've been working with Dynamics. So I kind of boiled it down to 5 R's. You review, you remove, you reorganize, you reimagine, and you relaunch, in that order. And we'll kind of get into these as we go along. But those are the main steps that we go through. So things to remember. This will probably, and now I didn't say it will be, it can be a painful process, and it really depends on a lot of other factors that we'll cover here in just a second. It is also going to be a lot of manual labor, because we just don't have some tools to do things. I have tools that I have created over the years that help me do some of these things, and there are tools available, but at the end of the day, it's still a lot of manual labor, strictly because you just have to do things by hand when you don't know what you're doing. And we'll cover that in just a minute. And again, as I mentioned, every single situation is different. There's no way to apply a boilerplate to a system of Dynamics and say, this is how you fix it. You literally have to start at the very beginning at the bottom and work your way up to the top. And hopefully along the way, you learn things and you can fix things as you go. So as I mentioned, this was a 10-month-old system, and it, we had serious discussions about starting over. It turned out that would have been way too much work, and it's not really was no return on investment. So we just decided to kind of fix it in place. Is what we did. So the original version may play a role in the decision. When I say original version, you have to remember that there are still a lot of CRM 4.0 and CRM 2011 systems on premises out there. Some of you may have those, okay? So again, the age may or may not play a role. And the reason I say may or may not, again, because of my personal experience, but also it really kind of depends on the company, how much change is involved with the day-to-day business, year over year, et cetera. So again, these things may affect you, they may not affect you. In all likelihood, they will affect you, but you always have to put may. So there's a few tools in the toolbox. Some of you may need, some of you may not. So XRM Toolbox is a great collection of free utilities. I'll may mention a couple of them here, and I'll have a bunch of the specific plugins like for the XRM Toolbox in the notes that I'm going to have. So the way I work with this is I put the YouTube video up, and then I modify the blog post where this was announced with the recording of that, along with any notes that I have. So, and then I emailed that out to everybody. So you don't have to really take notes if you don't want to, or screenshots. So I'll have all these listed. Snapshot is the documentation tool that I sell that will pull a lot of the data out. And then in certain cases, we'll talk about this later, there's a free tool from Progress or Telerik software called Just Decompile if you need to decompile plugins that you don't have the source code to, which does happen occasionally. So we'll talk about all those later. So the very basic of I need to know if I can delete this thing, and most of what we're talking about is deletion. There's some reorganization we'll talk about, but a lot of it is just deletion. So this happens to be a just a random field from Click Dimensions that I picked out of one of my systems. And as you can see here, it has 2 dependencies. So 2 things are dependent on this specific field. The first is the form, and it's the Click Dimensions form. And the second, or the first one actually, is a entity relationship. So this is one that's kind of confusing to people. So what it's actually doing is if you go into the relationship between the contact and whatever else is in there, if you double, by the way, sorry if I'm back up for a second, I'm talking too fast. Anytime that you look at the dependency list here, if you double click on a row, it will actually open up that thing, whatever that thing is. In this case, it could be the entity relationship. In the other case, it will be the form itself. So this is how you quickly navigate to where you want to go. And I can show you that here at the end if you want. So what is happening here is there is a relationship between the contact probably originating lead, I would bet where that is. And what's happening is there is a field mapping. And this is not exactly kind of clear about what that one specific thing is. Most of them are pretty clear. Oh, this field is on this form or this view or this, whatever it might be. This is just one just happens to be kind of weird. But you get to this by just selecting whatever thing it is. It could be a process or a field or into your dashboard or whatever, and clicking on Show Dependencies, and it will show you the list of where this field is referenced throughout the system. This list has to be 0 before you can remove it, just to be advised. If you try to remove a field or whatever that is referenced, it will pop up an error message, and there's a link that will bring up this exact dialog box so that you can go and find and fix those relations. Okay. Solution layers. Fun with solutions. So solution layers are how the solutions are added to the system in relation to the specific object in question. In this case, it is an attribute called CDI_image. The order is how it got into the system and how it's being referenced. So as you can see, order number 1 is click dimensions, which is the click dimension solution. Order number 2 is the default publisher, which is the active solution. So the active solution is the combination of everything that has been installed into the system. So what we're doing with this is we're trying to determine, is there anything that would keep us from removing this thing? And why this is an issue is if I create a solution that happens to use the CD_image field, and then I reference that, the next thing you know, I have a new solution in here. It'll probably be in between click dimensions and active. And in order for me to uninstall click dimensions, should I choose to, I have to remove the CDI_image field from my solution before the click dimensions solution has been, can be removed. So what happens is, if you have a reference between one solution and the other, you have to back it out in the order that it was put, referenced or installed. So in this case, I would remove my solution, and then I could remove click dimensions. Now, this doesn't seem like a big deal until you start actually enhancing, say, the field service solution with your own solutions, and then you have to make a change or whatever. And what will happen is, the phrase is, we locked it in place, which means we have one solution that has a dependency on another, and they won't move. And it can be quite a fascinating tale to get out. To give you an example, and this one thing I was talking about, this one company, the partner had installed the Dynamics Portal solution. They didn't use it. The Dynamics Portal solution is actually made up of 26, depending on how you install it, 26 solutions. The first time I uninstalled those solutions, it took me 4 hours to uninstall 26 solutions because I wasn't sure which order they had to come out. So what I would do is I would uninstall one. If that worked, I would go to the next one. And I kind of went in what I thought would be the order of, say, least important to most important. And then, you know, again, I could probably use this to figure it out as well. And then just slowly but surely pull the things out until I got done. The next time, it didn't take me as long to get them out because I kind of knew which order to pull them out of. So this is always a thing you need to watch. Okay, so look at the review process. So again, this is just kind of what I kind of came up with myself based on various experiences. If you have a team of people, or even can offshore some things that to other groups within your company, or even third parties, you know, people like me or other consulting companies, breaking it up is really easy. Okay, what entities are we using? What are we not using? The fields within those, we have solutions. Processes is a big one. Like at this company, I found, I couldn't tell you how many processes, mostly workflows, that had nothing in them. They literally had no steps whatsoever. So that was quite fascinating to me. So you have to, and you really can't, there's no way to document what's inside of a process because of the way the data is stored. So you literally have to open it up and look at it. And then that's where the documentation comes in. Plugins and plugin steps. So the plugin is the physical DLL that gets registered. The plugin step is the actual action item that references the thing inside the plugin assembly. And those are two different things. So you will find plugins that are not referenced. You will, in some cases, you can actually see a plugin assembly registered with no steps. So that can come out. Or maybe you have plugin steps that are not being used. So they literally are, they're in there, but they're disabled. And the big question is why? Why are they in there? Okay, this goes back to the maintenance of it. So those are things you can check. The next stage is security roles and security role usage. Like I mentioned earlier, the people that, when I got there, they were in the middle of cleaning up security. So again, they had lots of people with system administrator roles or global admin for Office 365, which they had to clean up. It's part of a regulatory requirement in some places. So just check all of these things. And these are pretty easy to clean up because it's just, turning things off and removing things. Then it gets kind of fascinating. So forms and views, do we have things on forms that are not necessary? In 99% of all cases I've ever seen, the answer is yes. People go abso-freaking-lutely crazy with fields. Oh, we got to have these 4,000 fields on this form. Why? You filled out 4. And, that's the way it works. Views, either system or user defined. So system views are one thing. Those you can manage. User-defined views are harder to get to. You have to have tools like some things that are inside the XRM toolkit or toolbox to actually help you find these things because they're not managed at a system level. So depending on how long your system has been around is how long these things are in there. Okay. Same with charts. Some people go crazy with charts because they like pictures. Sometimes they don't. Apps is another one. A lot of the dependencies that get set up is by people creating apps that they don't use. And what happens is if you go to remove a field that is on a form that is on an app, you can't do it because it's referenced. So you have to kind of go from the top down and back everything out. We'll talk about apps here in a little bit toward the end. I'll talk about the last one first. Templates, like in this place, they had, I think, 50 or 60 email templates that weren't even being used because that's not how they did work. The partner had created them. And again, it's not a big deal. It's just another maintenance point because they were using fields we needed to get rid of. Because what happened is they created stuff that they thought they were going to use and then went a totally different direction and didn't use any of it. So it just became easier to, what I did is I literally created a solution, threw them all in there, exported the solution, deleted everything. The others are a little bit more complicated. So JavaScript web resources are problematic. So it's really easy to find out if they're being used, and I would recommend you do that first. I worked on a system a few years ago as a job that lasted about 2 years, and we were doing some cleanup, very, very similar to what I was talking about with this other company. And I literally worked for a month updating JavaScript. And one night I go in and I started doing dependency checking, which I should have done first, lesson learned. And I found out that probably 50% of the code that I had modified was totally unused in the system. So that was just a real insult to my intelligence and my ability to actually do my job. But anyways, just something to think about. Other web resources, if you have HTML or if somebody's imported a bunch of images, again, they don't take up much space, but just it's another maintenance point. If you don't need them, you don't need them. And why it's a big deal is if you've ever tried to add a web resource to a solution and you've got 5,000 of them and you got to scroll through and find them, that's when it becomes a pain in the butt. So you've gone and pulled all this data together. You figured out what we don't need, or you have a very good idea. And at this point, in all honesty, it's an idea. It's not a plan. Okay. So this is where you come up with a plan. So what do? Do we just rebuild it? Do we create a new one and migrate it to that new one? A lot of customers that I work with when I was doing a lot of migration from CRM 4.0 or 2011 to especially to online and stuff, it was easier to take the data and just start over. Okay, so but it really depends. And then finally, recreate. Do we just kind of redo stuff? And again, it really depends. In the case I just mentioned, the real issue was um, we had too much automation. So we had flows, we had workflows, we had BPFs, we had all this process stuff behind the scenes, and it was next to impossible to move all of that to a new instance and start from there. So that just kind of after about 3 weeks, I realized, or actually about a week, I realized that was the rebuild was going to be impractical, or the recreation was going to be impractical. And it turned out we're just rebuilding it. So Stephen Covey, one of my favorite authors, has a thing you've probably heard before: begin with the end in mind. Okay. So again, this is where you define where you're headed and how you want to be there. Okay. You need to get buy-in from everybody. Remember, this will cause pain to someone sooner or later. Okay. Strictly because for some unknown reason, people don't like change. And since they don't like change, they cause issues, right? So have everybody involved in the process throughout the process. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But it starts with management and ends with the user community. So this is where your focus group or your, user, whatever you call whatever you call the boards that you talk to with your users. Hopefully you have one. If you don't, you need to create one. So you could talk to them about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and make sure that they understand. So we have two methodologies here, and this is really just standard development stuff. We either have an iterative process or we have a waterfall. Iterative is we do a little bit at a time, and we do a change, we release a change, we do another one, we do release that, or we do everything at once. Okay, so it really depends on the amount of change that has to occur, what exactly is changing, and then the scope of those changes. So we had the ability to say we rolled out changes to lead first. And then the next set of changes was um, contact, account, opportunity, and then another custom one in there. So that was, minor. But if you have many entities that you use, it may be too much change at once. Remember, you've always got to keep the end user in mind on this. Okay. So sometimes it's just easier to rip the Band-Aid off all at once and just do everything at one time. Okay. The problem with this, which we'll get into later, is depending on what changes you have to do, it may be extremely difficult to do the changes all at once, strictly because of the amount of changes that have to be made. So in this case, an iterative approach, or maybe what they call that, well, technically it's called Scrum or Falls, which is a iterative development Scrum combined with Waterfall, Scrum or Fall. So it's a combination of iterative development and waterfall. So where you're doing some things in the iterations and then kind of the big batch at once. Okay, so any of these will work depending on your organization and the number of changes you have to make. So here's how we had things structured. So what we did is we made a copy of production and we called it Sandbox 2. This is where we did all of our work. So we made all of our changes and then in Sandbox 2, and then I packaged them up into a solution and I moved them to Sandbox 1 for testing. Because again, we're removing things. And so first thing you're testing now, need to back up for a second. We're using unmanaged solutions for this. Okay. Managed solutions presents another realm of problems. Okay. So we'll talk about that in a little bit too. So first thing I was testing is, did I get everything in my solution I needed to actually deploy it? Okay. If it didn't, it'll tell you you're missing a required component. You go back, put it in, keep going until you do that. Then you do testing, make sure everything works. And then assuming everything works, we roll that into production. And we just repeated that process. Technically, it was like 3 rollouts, I think is what we actually ended up doing. So again, the solutions are going to really make a difference about how this works. Unmanaged solutions are not as bad because you're actually making the changes directly in the environment, because you can. Managed solutions take a little bit more effort. You have to, and again, it depends on your version of Dynamics, but you have to clone the solution. You have to apply that. You have to basically remove stuff. And then, sorry, folks, I got a new puppy. Anyway, so the big problem with this is managed solutions will probably take twice the amount of work to get the same amount done. I don't know if you're using managed or unmanaged for your production environment, but that will totally dictate the amount of time and effort it takes to actually roll this out. So keep that in mind when you start. So low-hanging fruit. Do we have unused entities, draft processes? So there's nothing worse than going through. Hang on a second, please. Okay, sorry about that. Nothing drives me crazier than actually seeing draft workflows. I'm like, why are they draft? Did you forget something, or is it not used anymore? One of the things I teach in my admin class is if you have a workflow that you're taking out of production, change the name to be not used if you don't want to kill it. Most of the times, what I do with that specifically is I take it out and put it into a solution and just export it out, and then if I have it, if in case I need it, okay. And as we discussed earlier, take out the security roles that you don't need. Okay. Hey guys, I really apologize. I need to take a 2-minute break. I'll be right back. Okay, and I'm back. Sorry about that. So again, easy to check your security role access. Security roles, especially a system administrator, should be limited to the administration. So, development maybe depends on how things go. Okay, work back to front. So remove components that don't have effects on users first. So things like processes, entities they don't use or rarely use, things like that. So work backwards to forwards, changing the forms and views last because that's what they see. App model. One of the cool things, so, you never can tell who really needs something until you take it away from them. Okay. Hang on. Sorry, folks. There's no joke amongst report writers that what you do is you basically, if you want to know if somebody uses a report, you take it away from them and you see if they complain. And what you do is you take all of them away, then add them back as they ask about them. You can do the same thing with apps. Like for if you have views or forms or whatever it might be, dashboards, charts, whatever, just don't include them in the application. And it's like, hey, where's my widget I used to use? Oh, I'm sorry about that. Just go add it back and publish the app, and there it is. And that way you can figure out before you go into making destructive changes what you have to do. Okay. So, okay, sorry about that. Okay, reorganize. So one of the things you really need to keep in mind is, you're a user too. So while you're in there, what makes your job harder? Do you have a process that you have to follow or they make you follow that is, something that you do or they have to do on a regular basis that you're really tired of doing? Is there any way you can correct that while you're in here? And Chris asks, when I say apps, do you mean Power Apps? No, I don't mean Power Apps. I actually mean the app. Well, technically they're model-driven Power Apps, Chris, but they're actually the apps within Dynamics. So if you go to settings, My Apps, that's where you see that. It's like Sales Hub, Customer Service Hub, things like that. Those are apps. So anyway, what do you not like about the system? And build that into your changes as well. Okay, this is the fun part, I think. I love doing this. So now that you got all the cruft out of the system, now you can reimagine it. So our goal is to build it better, faster, stronger, make it more streamlined, provide the users with what they need when they need it, because at the end of the day, less is more. And that's what people are really getting to. And I'll probably have another webinar about this later on, about that specific type of stuff. So the big question, and I mentioned this earlier, especially when you have Dynamics that has been installed since, say, 2007 or whatever, is the company today the one it was when you first installed it? In most cases, the answer is no. Okay, so how do we make Dynamics fit the company that exists today versus the company that existed whenever we first put it in? Okay, because that's how all this cruft got in there, is people were making changes as they went along. So we had management changes, we had process changes, we had management process changes, and everything that went with it. So what are we doing today? So how are we doing business today? Let's make the system do that instead of the way we did it 10 years ago or 5 years ago, or even some cases 1 year ago. So get the user community involved, ask them what they really need to do their job, what will make their job easier. And the best one, and you can actually sometimes start this one first because this starts the conversation. What drives you crazy about this thing? And then just listen and record everything they say, and then go back and figure out how to fix that. The unified interface is, fast approaching us. It's already here. It's going to be here permanently very, very soon as well. So now's the time to do all this stuff because we don't have a choice. And, it is a better UI. So it only took us, 7 years to come back around to the way we did it in 2011. So, things happen sometimes. So again, the apps I mentioned. So if you go to, and I can just show you here in just a little bit, but yeah, so if you go to settings, my apps, you can actually create a new app, and that defines not only the sitemap, which is the navigation, but also the components that you see. So for instance, if you have salespeople and customer service people and they don't actually get into each other's business, you can create an application for customer service, which they already have, called Customer Service Hub. And then you can create one, which you already have, called Sales Hub. And just you have them use that. But the idea is, what do they need to do their job? As you know, Dynamics has a lot of functionality. Most people need maybe 20, 30% of each application's functionality. So give that to them. Relaunch. Okay, this is where things get kind of sticky. So develop a plan, get the plan approved, over communicate the plan. I cannot emphasize this enough. Execute that plan and then review your execution. Okay. I'm not going to say this will guarantee you a perfect rollout, but you got to start somewhere. Okay. So modify this as necessary to fit your organization. So a couple things I mentioned, occasionally, and I have done this more times than I'd like, and I have an article, whole thing about this on my blog somewhere. Always maintain control of the source code of your assets. So if you hire a consultant to write a plugin for you or a custom workflow activity or something like that, make sure that you have the source code. If you are a consultant or you hire a consultant or something like that, same thing. Make sure you have the source code at the end of the job. Because if you don't have the source code, you can't do something about that. The next thing is, have that source code in a safe place. I like to use Azure DevOps. It has connections to a couple different source code repositories. You can put the code up there. What I do for customers I do work with, I create a repository for them for that project. I give them full security access to it, and then I am not responsible for that after my job is done. Okay. In the case where you cannot get the source code, like for instance, I had a partner I work with in Florida, and they paid me several $1,000s because they had a consultant who wrote a bunch of plugins, and then they fired her, and then they reformatted her laptop, and all the source code was on that laptop. And the customer needed changes. And then so what I had to do is I literally had to decompile, rewrite, and fix bugs in the original design. And that literally took me over a month of work. And the partner had to pay for the whole thing because it wasn't the customer's problem. Okay, so just decompile will actually compile it back to mostly the original source. Data type conversion. So this you run into occasionally, and my last project there, last job, I ran into it where the partner just typed stuff in. So we had number fields as strings and all kinds of things like that. And the problem is that presents data type issues if it's a problem. And my final estimation is it wasn't worth the effort to convert because we weren't using it in a way that mattered. Okay. So didn't make any changes there. But if you have to do that, it's really, really complicated because you can't convert a data type. You have to create a new field and move the data into it. There are tools, like Daryl Labar has a tool that will, in some cases, convert the data type, move the data over. Sometimes it doesn't work, and that's just something you deal with. But it's a pain in the wazoo. The biggest problem is if it's part of a managed solution, it's really hard to fix. Really hard to fix. So sometimes you end up having to just create a new field and just ignore the first one. PCF Controls. If you guys have not seen the PCF gallery, you need to go look. So PCF stands for Power Apps Control Framework. So this is the new framework Microsoft released that they have converted all of their controls into. And you can create your own controls. And there are some doozies out there. They're just beautiful. They provide just amazing functionality. And we already had some built into the product that you could use, started with the mobile device like sliders and different things like that, buttons for the Booleans and stuff like that. But the big thing is there's all kinds of things out on the PCF gallery that allow you to add all kinds of functionality to the user interface to make it more efficient for the user. And that's the whole thing, make it more efficient for the user. The final thing here is a lot of people don't review their system jobs, and they have a lot of internal processes that fail, either outright fail or they're in a waiting state. Waiting state in most cases is a type of failure. So what you do is you go to the system job table, you do an advanced find, you look for data that is in the message field. So basically a message field contains data. If it does contain data, there is an error inside of that job. So you need to review those because you could have failures that are popping up that you don't know about, because if you're not in the habit of checking these, then you don't know. I think I have a full webinar up on my YouTube site about management, and I think I have that in there. So any questions? Okay, Thomas, I'm gonna, okay, so kind of use a sec. I am, let's see, allowed to talk. So Thomas, you are unmuted. Thomas Nick.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I inherited a D365 sales and PSA environment right after it having been launched. And the firm broke ties with a partner and everything, and the system was completely messed up. So I've been working as a sole admin and dev for the last 6 months to fix it and extend it and stuff. And I'm kind of doing okay, even though I've never used Dynamics before. But I've been using unmanaged solutions, and I'm starting to confuse myself a bit and stuff. And I'm wondering if I should make the jump to managed solutions. And even with unmanaged solutions, can you tell me what the best practices for such things as, dividing your solutions into parts that make sense are?
Well,
Like, do I have just fixed solutions for like PSA and then accounts, contacts and stuff, and then processes, or?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have the 12 hours it would take to have that conversation today.
Okay.
But so the big difference is managed solutions. So managed solutions are what Microsoft recommends of, hey, here's how you deploy. So you create unmanaged solutions in Sandbox, you export it out as managed, and that's what you deploy. The problem is once you go to managed solutions, you can never come back to unmanaged. Okay. So you once you make the change, it's forever. Now they have built-in facilities that help you do a lot of things that have plagued us for the years, and it's taken them years. Now the good thing about managed solutions is, if you haven't noticed, Microsoft is eating their own dog food. Now it took them about 5 years, but they are actually using managed solutions for their components. So like when you install sales and you install customer service, it is a managed solution. It's no secret sauce anymore. It's actually, they're using this, they're suffering the same pain we would. Okay, so when they run into a bug, they have to fix it, which is cool. Okay, so I wouldn't recommend it at this point because I don't think you know enough about it. And the big problem is you have this dependency thing that can get set up where you can't do certain things. So it's a really long, complicated discussion. And I'd probably have to know more about it. But yeah, it's not easy. Don't feel bad. I mean, if you've never seen Dynamics and you can actually understand these things, that's great. I mean, you're doing good. So keep doing that.
Great. All right.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks a lot.
Shuey, you can talk now. Oops. Shuby, can you hear me? Can you talk? I can't unmute. You're going to unmute yourself. I think you muted yourself.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can. Thank you.
Hi. I have a couple of questions, Mitch. One is regarding the migration of service scheduling. If you have any insight on migration, because I believe, I'm thinking of from 8.2 to 9.0, and I believe that the service scheduling has been completely revamped, and that is why I was thinking if you have any points that I should take care of while migrating to the new service scheduling.
Are you talking about universal scheduling?
I am, yes.
Okay, so I don't have a lot to say, but I know a little bit because we were doing this. So
okay.
The last thing I was doing was removing PSA and field service from their installation. Okay, they didn't need either one of those. All they were using was a scheduling engine. And if you look back at the solution layering, what you would see was universal schedule as one. Number two was like field service or PSA, and then three would be active. And so I was actually removing everything. So it is its own solution now, and it seems to be the primary solution for scheduling. You can look at some of the fields and stuff related to scheduling and find out.
Okay.
But I only got as far as removing stuff, so I don't exactly know how it would work. I'm sure somebody's written a blog about it, like Neil Parker's or somebody.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is more or less related to DevOps with CM, and I wanted to understand if you've used it, and from what I have understood is that we should be using unmanaged solutions between dev and integration environments, and then probably just a UAT should be managed. If you've used it, could you elaborate on if this is the way to go?
Well, generally, it depends what exactly you define as your integration. So you development has to be unmanaged. You don't have a choice there. Okay.
Yes.
So if you're using your integration system as, say, dev number 2, then it would be okay. So like if you're taking components from different developers and you're merging them into a single thing and then exporting it out for UAT and production, that's probably fine. I have done that.
Okay.
So that is fine. It really depends. I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It really depends on what you're using, how you're doing the development. So like if you're taking different components from different things, and putting them together in the integration system, then they has to be unmanaged because that's the only way you can make changes. But definitely UAT, if you're doing the production, you're doing managed, then it starts at UAT.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much.
You bet. Let's see. Alistar had a question. Said I made a statement that managed solutions doubles the workload around technical debt. Yeah, because you have to go through a bunch of hoops to actually remove components that are inside of a managed solution. So I've got a link to a blog article that has a really good explanation of that. And the main thing there is you have to clone your solution. You have to remove the stuff from it, deploy that solution, and then basically merge, update the solution. So it's extra steps instead of just going into the environment and deleting the field or the entity or whatever. Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Just raise your hand or put it in the chat, whichever one you want. Nobody? Okay. Well, hey, I really appreciate everybody's time today. And like I said, I will get this up on the YouTube sometime either today or this weekend, depending on how everything goes. And then I'll mail everybody so that they have a copy of it. So thanks a lot and have yourself a great weekend.